Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Ochsner Sports Performance Center, which the New Orleans Saints have graciously allowed us to use for today's program. As we begin, just a few housekeeping notes. Please continue to serve yourself breakfast, but we ask that you please silence your cell phone. My name is Tony Adams, and I serve as the Gulf States Regional President for First Horizon Bank. On behalf of First Horizon, I am pleased to welcome you to BGR's second of 4 breakfast briefings this year. We are proud to sponsor this series, and we are grateful for WWNO Public Radio for extending its reach. WWNO will rebroadcast this event on Tuesday, July 14th at 10 a.m. and again at 10 p.m. BGR Breakfast Briefings advance organization's members by giving residents the opportunity to hear directly from government officials and policy experts on matters that matter to this community. Sorry about that. Video recording of today's program will be available at bgr.org. Following the program, we invite you to share your feedback. You'll find forms at the tables and at the registration that you can complete and return to us. Or you can scan the QR code and complete the survey on your phone. We will display the QR code on the screen later in the program. Thank you for joining us this morning, and we hope you enjoyed today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. We are grateful to First Horizon Bank for once again sponsoring BGR's Breakfast Briefing series. Your support allows BGR to keep these events free and open to the public. We also thank the New Orleans Saints organization for hosting this breakfast briefing at the Ochsner Sports Performance Center. My name is Becky Mowbray, and I serve as President and CEO of BGR, the Bureau of Governmental Research, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here this morning. Thank you for staying with us on this moving date, and thank you for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to ground us in where we are today. We're here in Jefferson Parish, and that's intentional. The issues that BGR works on don't stop at the parish lines, and neither do the decisions that shape this region. We are very proud to be having a regional breakfast briefing this morning. Our role at BGR is to do our homework on how decisions in different parishes and throughout the state are made, what they mean, and share that information in a way that people can use. Since our last breakfast briefing, BGR has done work that has included the proposed Caesars revenue deal, changes to the New Orleans court system, and governance planning tied to the Sewerage and Water Board. It's work that helps people understand what's at stake and what comes next. You can find it all at bgr.org. The best way to stay connected to BGR's work is to become a member. Membership forms are available at our tables or the registration desk, or you can join through our website. We also invite you to follow us on social media at BGR NOLA. Joining us for today's conversation on population trends and the ways in which economic development can help stimulate our city's growth is Annalisa Kelly, Vice President of Strategic Programs and Partnerships at JEDCO, Walt, President and CEO of New Orleans and Company, and Jeff Schwartz, Deputy Mayor for Economic Development for the City of New Orleans. At the conclusion of today's moderated panel, we'll take questions from the audience. To submit a question, please scan the QR code on the screen or follow the printed instructions at your table or seat. This will take you to the online form at bgr.org/QA, and please include your name if you'd like to be identified. I'd like to note that the views expressed in today's program are those of our speakers. And before we move on to me joining the panelists here and beginning our moderated discussion, I wanted to set the stage with just an intro about some background about population in Orleans and Jefferson Parish. So today's conversation touches on a topic that's been on many people's minds: how to curb population decline and improve the economy in the New Orleans area. Just to add some facts to the discussion, Orleans Parish reached its peak population in 1960 at nearly 628,000 residents, and it's now home to about 362,000 residents. Despite a gradual increase after Hurricane Katrina, it has lost about 7% of its residents since 2019. Meanwhile, Jefferson Parish's population, which peaked around 1980, has stayed relatively flat over the same period. Neither parish's employment level has fully recovered to its pre-pandemic state. Factors such as high housing costs, a perceived lack of economic opportunities, and other quality of life issues contribute to this trend. Many metro areas across the state and across the country are facing similar challenges. But there is hope for economic growth in Orleans and Jefferson. The state has the country's third highest first-year business survival rate, and the New Orleans metro area ranks high in several surveys of entrepreneurial opportunity and economic development projects. Tapping into these opportunities will require strategic, multi-parish, and public-private partnerships. And we look forward to talking about some of those today. So please join me in welcoming Annalisa Kelly, Walt, and Jeff Schwartz, and we'll start our discussion. I'm going to move around. Thank you. Okay, now I'll join you. So everyone, let's start with the obvious question. How worried should we be about population decline in greater New Orleans? Is this the crisis that it's made out to be? Why? And we can start.
Well, first, thank you so much for having us. I was really both excited and also, you know, it's a big question, so I wanted to take it really seriously. I'm so pleased to be joined by such fantastic colleagues regionally in New Orleans too. Yeah, population decline or growth is really a barometer in a lot of ways of how holistically the economy, but really the region is doing. So it is something to pay attention to, especially when you're seeing other cities nationally with really tremendous growth, which I'll say in itself, when you have areas like Austin or Charlotte or Nashville seeing growth in like the 50 to 80% increase, there are issues there too, obviously, with affordability and resources. So it's not to say that there aren't issues with rapid growth, but seeing decline is something that should worry leaders and public servants and really call us to look at why. And so I'm glad we're having this discussion, and it is something that, as we'll get into the conversation, I'm sure we'll talk about some of the initiatives that are specifically looking to target that for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, thank you, BGR, and thank you to the Saints organization for hosting this. I mean, I think it's appropriate that we're here at the Saints facility. I mean, how do we judge whether or not the team is doing well? You look at the scoreboard, and the scoreboard is population, right? People vote with their feet. When communities create opportunity, when they provide educational opportunities for families, when they provide affordable housing, then people move to those locations and they stay there. And when they fail to meet some of those obligations, then people move their feet to other locations. There are a lot. This is a really complicated subject matter, though, and I think it's important to never allow it to be simplified. You know, affordability issues like insurance and other things are absolutely informing how businesses invest and how families invest in communities. Media and public relations matters a lot. You know, I mean, I'll just say, and we can get into this, but yesterday, Mayor Moreno announced a really exciting economic development initiative in New Orleans East, and I couldn't help but notice on social media that there were nothing but negative comments from people in our region. And so here we are in this region together, of Jefferson, Orleans, St. Bernard, Plaquemine, so many of our 10 parish area that we call our region, and that we refer to as Greater New Orleans, and we continue to just beat up on each other. A lot of those comments were around public safety and other issues, which I have to commend the leaders of the city, the former mayor and the current mayor, as well as state and federal and local organizations who have partnered to reduce crime to record levels. And yet hundreds of comments about how New Orleans East cannot survive and be successful because of public safety. And I just reject that. And I think we all need to reject it, and we need to speak out about it. The reality is, if you want to succeed, it takes strategy and a plan. What the mayor laid out is a strategy and a plan to capitalize on the Louisiana International Terminal and on Michoud NASA facility. That is a plan. We should look at it, we should rally around it, and we should try to execute it. If it works, we should do more of it. If it doesn't, we should come up with another strategy. But we shouldn't ever fall into this cycle of negativity that feeds on itself. And I think that's a really important thing. It feels a little like esoteric, but at the end of the day, the way we communicate about ourselves and the way we talk about what's happening in our community really matters. And the scorecard is population.
Hear, hear. Couldn't agree more, obviously, with my colleagues. And I echo my gratitude to Ms. Benson and the Saints organization for hosting us this morning. I was joking before I wish that I had a cafeteria like this every morning. I would definitely not eat breakfast at home. I would definitely be at work probably at 7 o'clock in the morning. I couldn't agree more with my colleagues. I think it is a very serious question of population and growth. I think it is something where we should not be paralyzed by where we are currently. And so, I know we'll get into it in the discussion and very much just putting an exclamation point on what Annalisa and Walt just shared. But I think that one of the framing devices that I'll offer is that we don't want to be managing decline. Managing decline leads to what I call, or lots of folks would call, wicked problems, where you're in a scarcity mindset. You're in sort of a, tit for tat or, a zero-sum game kind of mentality, which I think, frankly, the region and the state have been in for far too long. And anybody who knows me knows that I'm an eternal optimist, and I think that we have truly an embarrassment of riches in the city of New Orleans and in the region and the state. And as Walt put very well, we just need to connect those dots better. And I'm very confident that something that is really the ultimate indicator, it's the ultimate economic indicator, population, tells you exactly where someone feels. They are not BSing you when they say that you are doing well or you are not, because they will move with their feet, as Walt said. And so I take it as a very serious indicator of where we are. You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you are and where you've been. But I find no reason for despair in where we currently are.
Very good. And before we move on to all of the other questions about what we're doing about it, from where each of you sit, what is driving population decline in Orleans and Jefferson? Like, what's your perspective on that?
I'll take this one first. I think it's everything Walt and Annalisa mentioned. I think there are issues with quality of life. There are issues with barriers to success for both families and for businesses. And then I think we've not been strategic enough at connecting businesses and our workforce to opportunity. And so I think we can delve into this, and I'm sure folks are going to have a lot of good questions about this. But I think, if it's difficult to get a permit from safety and permits, or if it's difficult to figure out the transportation system to get your kid or a worker to school, and if you're a college graduate and you don't know that New Orleans is a leader in tourism and hospitality or the energy industry or commercial aerospace, it's no wonder that folks might find reason to look at some of the other cities that we've mentioned. And so I think those are three areas that we really focus on: those barriers, that quality of life, and the connection to the innovation economy.
Sure. No, just to echo that, it's such a complicated matter, and obviously every individual is going to have a different story, but it is such a holistic thing. It is obviously jobs, and that's what, driving growth comes from job availability and quality jobs, but also it's the quality of life matters, and that's why it's so important in economic development to really take a holistic and overall view. If you focus just on one aspect of a region and a community, you're going to ignore these really important other things like housing and education, even efforts like beautification, obviously resilience in our natural environment. And so that's why I know the city and Jefferson, we've had a variety of plans that, strategic plans that are long-term that really touch on a lot of the things that make a community. Ultimately, we want to ensure that the overall region is somewhere that someone wants to be. And so it can't just be focused on, tax incentives or just one aspect of it. It has to be a holistic approach.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to this question, but I think a little bit about the work that we've tried to kick off with JEDCO, with GNO Inc., with the city, with New Orleans Chamber of Commerce, and with the Urban League, the 2035 Vision Plan, and we'll certainly dive into that. But at the end of the day, I think one of the most important things that we can continue to do is attract the businesses that we can, but really be focused on allowing the businesses that are growing here to scale. And so there's a lot of data that suggests that we're a leading community in entrepreneurship and in non-employee-based business organizations, so single-member LLCs and very small businesses. What that does is it leads to business success for some, but ultimately not employment opportunities and career and growth opportunities for folks that are mid-career. And I think that's where we're losing people. So I think thinking about scalability after the original entrepreneurship is something that we've got to be really focused on. Mid-level careers and then growing beyond that. We're certainly a really strong region when it comes to small businesses, and they're the core and the backbone of what we all do here. But ultimately, we've got to figure out a way to help those businesses scale so that there are career opportunities attached to it.
Okay. So did y'all get that? We've got the agenda now of all the things that we need to be working on, and we can solve them like that. But this is actually a nice lead in the discussion of quality of life being part of it. Walt, I wanted to ask you about the Vision 2035 plan. So Vision 2035 is a bold plan to help improve quality of life for metro area residents and ultimately retain talent and incentivize job opportunities. What actions are some key short-term strategies to kickstart progress on the plan's outcome?
I think the foundation of this is collaboration and establishing tables where we put the right stakeholders together. In 2009, then Lieutenant Governor Mitch Landrieu and the tourism industry created the Tourism Master Plan for our region, and it laid out a number of things that they wanted to accomplish to move us to the next level and keep us an elite destination from a competitiveness standpoint. The convention center supported that effort, but mostly it was Lieutenant Governor's office. Mitch then got elected mayor and was able to implement that plan by working with our regional partners to build a new airport, to begin development along the riverfront. We're now finally seeing that come to fruition. When I joined this organization in 2020, they turned to me and said, it's time to update the master plan. And when I went back and read it, I saw a lot of gaps. And those gaps were in places where the tourism industry could not influence outcomes on its own. And so I went back to our board and said I didn't think the right approach was updating a tourism master plan, but instead developing a vision plan. And I wanted to get GNO Inc., JEDCO, Urban League, Chamber of Commerce, and the Greater New Orleans Foundation to join us in a steering committee. We've engaged 200 different organizations throughout the city and region, incorporated about 22 other master plans into it, and created a document that's available on our website if you want to look into it more distinctly, but it created about 10 leverage points. Some of the ones that I think are most relevant regionally are things like connectivity, continuing to invest in regional transit in a way that allows people to access jobs and affordable housing. These are fundamental to building healthy communities. The city, the region, the state, even the South has really struggled with public transit for generations. And if we can crack some of that code, I think it sets us up for a dramatic movement in the right direction where people have a freedom to live and work where they choose to live throughout the region. We've seen the success of this of passenger rail that's finally been implemented between New Orleans and Mobile, where we expected to have about 90,000 people use it in the first year. We had 100,000 people use it in the first 6 months. Connectivity, investment in connectivity matters. if you think about New Orleans East and growing the economy there, real connectivity would transform that community within a few years. You would have affordable housing options. You would have access to places like Ochsner and LCMC Health, which are great employers. You would have access to employees in the downtown corridor without requiring people to live so close to it in higher priced real estate that affordability becomes a challenge. So I think connectivity is really one of those core leverage points, but developing high quality outdoor recreational space for communities, for young people, but also for families and residents in general, to utilize and celebrate allows us, as from my perspective, to tell a broader story about what New Orleans is. To many people in the world, New Orleans is the French Quarter. And the French Quarter is one of the most special and treasured neighborhoods anywhere in America and beyond. But we are a lot more than that. And so we certainly are working to tell that story, but we also need to tell that story so that we can be a great place to live, to work, to learn, to invest, and to visit. But visit needs to come on the back end of that. And our economy and the visitor economy will actually be stronger with a more diversified economy, one that has more job opportunities, higher wages, and all the things that go along with that. And so it's taken a little while for the industry to, I think, embrace that concept, but we are certainly moving very aggressively in that direction with a lot of buy-in now. And I think it sets up a framework for future work that's very much aligned with the leadership in Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish and in our other parishes as we see the future development opportunities.
Fantastic. Speaking of coordination, next question is for all of you. How do the Vision 2035 plan, JEDCO's strategic plan, and New Orleans Economic Development Plan coordinate with each other and with other economic development plans like GNO Inc.'s? Do you see ways, how can we enhance that coordination and work together more effectively?
I love that question. I think that it really does tap into the core question also about population, because we will never succeed if we are siloed and independent. We are a strong region. If you look at Jefferson's population at around 400, more than 400,000, and Orleans at under 400,000, it sounds very, it's a different picture than the region being over 1 million, for example. But also, there's a lot of reasons to work regionally. Our economy is an ecosystem that pulls from all different parishes. And so when we have these plans like the Vision 2035 and Jefferson Edge 2030, there is a major focus on regionalism. It's not just looking at each parish. Someone who's working in Orleans and lives in Jefferson or vice versa, this is their home, this is their region. And so it's so important. There's a number of different industries specifically that also just by their very nature are going to be multi-parish, looking at our manufacturing, distribution, logistics, our port. Food and beverage is a big one. In fact, Jeff and I have had, now for several years, had these coordination conversations around food and beverage and how we can actually work together in a way that's very, very thoughtful and ways to lift up our food and beverage entrepreneurs. We're building a food and beverage incubator in Jefferson Parish to really serve a missing gap in that industry specifically. And then Orleans is doing fantastic efforts to lift up a lot of our food and beverage commissary kitchens. There's just so much work to be done in a coordinated fashion where we are working together rather than against each other. And so these plans specifically focus on that. And I think that's just so key for our growth. And it helps also that we have really strong leaders in Jefferson and Orleans that work together so well. Our parish president, Lee Shang, and Mayor Moreno are just fantastic leaders that are really driving things forward and actually coordinating together. And it's just so wonderful to see.
You're here. I think that there's a level of coordination, now, than there has been in probably a generation. And I think economies are regional. And so when you look at everything that we're talking about, whether it's quality of life, where folks want to live, you want to live on the North Shore, you want to live in the French Quarter, you want to live in Jefferson Parish, there should be the ability for someone to live in the place they want and access the employment center where they work or where they would like to work via public transportation, via roads that don't have potholes in them, et cetera. And so I think that there is this coordinated vision in a way that just frankly hasn't existed in a very long time. One of my favorite examples, it's one of so many, But I know offshore wind is not maybe a favored industry or topic right now. But how many of you have heard of the Block Island wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island? It was the first offshore wind, some folks in the room, first offshore wind farm in the country. Over 30% of the entire value chain, the supply chain of that project was actually built by companies in South Louisiana. And they weren't all headquartered in New Orleans or just based in Jefferson. Even the semi-autonomous fleet of vessels that is servicing Block Island was built by Edison Schwartz, obviously, in river parishes and elsewhere on the working coast. And so when you think about a regional economy and the opportunities that exist to export our expertise, I couldn't agree more. Annie, I think, put the finest point on it. We should not be thinking about parish lines. Companies don't think about parish lines except when they have to think about a permit or other barriers. But we really need to be embracing that, and I think our leadership is doing that in a way that just frankly has not happened in a really long time, if ever.
Yeah, I think it's really great that you made that point. And I think when we think about population, we really should be thinking about it as a metro area. There is going to be movement from parish to parish, and certainly there are reasons for that are not unimportant reasons. We all should try to compete with each other for population. It's probably healthy to have that kind of competition, but beating up on ourselves about people that stay in the region's probably not a healthy pastime for us. And so as people, tend to move around, I say that as somebody who grew up in St. Bernard Parish, who lives in Orleans Parish, who shops in Jefferson Parish a lot and was here yesterday grabbing a burger at Atomic Burger on Veterans as I was moving from one place to the next. I mean, I don't think that we see parish lines day to day as we live our lives, but there are times where politics and other things drive wedges that we should really resist. And when I think about the people that we as an organization compete with every day on behalf of our community, like Chicago or Atlanta or any of these other places where it literally takes you an hour and a half or 2 hours to drive across their city, that if we were organized in a similar way, we'd be a much bigger city. But at the end of the day, that matters very little. What really matters is that we compete regionally to be able to stand up against these cities and places that want to take economic opportunity that we would prefer to have. And so I was just looking at Chicago the other day as we were competing for an event with them. 9.4 million people in their region, 31 Fortune 500 companies headquartered in their region. And then you look at our region and how we compete very well. But population-wise, resource-wise, corporate presence-wise, we have challenges. And I think that we've got to continue to help our entrepreneurs scale up and be more impactful. We're not going to attract 30 new Fortune 500 headquarters. It's just not going to happen. And it doesn't need to. We can have a thriving economy without that. That is not the end-all, be-all of economic growth. I would say we could do something much more authentic and much more real by helping the small businesses that exist expand, scale, and grow.
And the next question is for Annalisa and Jeff about coordination. So recently, state lawmakers approved the creation of the West End Economic Development District that encompasses parts of both Jefferson and Orleans parishes. Can you tell us a little bit more about this redevelopment, and how can the two parishes further embrace this spirit of cooperation to improve economic development opportunities for the metro region?
Yeah, this is actually, I was almost going to say it in the last bit when I was talking about regional coordination. This is, I think, such a fantastic example of how our two parishes are working together really, really well. West End, as you all likely know and remember, was a thriving commercial area with restaurants. It has this very interesting, unique geography where the parish line goes right through it. And there has been a long time desire to bring back those restaurants. And really the only way to do that is to get in the weeds and work directly on, creating this economic development district that can generate sales tax revenue, and then actually develop an agreement between our two parishes to attract those businesses, but also share in the sales tax, because it's a very complicated matter. But the way the line goes, the restaurants are in Jefferson, but a lot of the areas in Orleans. In any case, what was so heartening, I think it was on Mayor Moreno's first full day of office. She called a meeting between Jefferson and Orleans, and we met, and it was just such a positive energy about we all want to do this. How do we work together? And it's been a real success in having everyone work together in the same direction to bring this asset, this jewel, back to activity.
That's right. I've heard some people describe it as bring 99-cent crawfish back to West End.
That's how you drive population.
Yeah, and it is funny because, and I see Mr. Rankin is in the audience here, so thank you for your leadership as well. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The mayor was laser focused on this, as well as now CAO Geruso did a lot of work while he was the district council member there on this. And it's funny because it's set up for a lack of collaboration, because the parish line basically means that Jefferson controls all of the waterfront frontage, which is the whole attraction for being on West End, and Orleans has all of the utilities in the Pothole Mart's parking lot. And so, it was not an overnight success. I will say that. I know there's been years of work trying to get folks collaboratively around a table. But I think, as Annalisa said, once you get leadership in the room that's very aligned, when you can have frank conversations about how do you share things like sales tax revenue, what development structure do you need in order for everyone to feel like they're getting a fair share, then anything is possible. And I'm very optimistic about maybe not 99-cent crawfish, but certainly seeing economic activity, new amenities, 21st century amenities, I think, coming to West End soon.
Yeah, what I love about it is that they finally figured out we can either keep fighting over who gets the revenue, or we could actually generate some revenue, and then we can have some of it. Like, some is better than none. And I think it's the same thing that we've been able to accomplish in the last couple of weeks with this Omni Hotel development. You have a piece of property that's generating $30,000 a year in property tax for the city. It will generate $3.5 million a year at a minimum after they develop the hotel. That's 100 times more. That's good. We should do that more. We should take underperforming properties, get them developed into properties that are higher performing. None of these projects are perfect. They're economic development projects for a reason. They require incentives to get done. But at the end of the day, taking low-performing properties and turning them into high-performing properties is the mission. It helps alleviate the burden on the residents, on the businesses of our community. It stabilizes budgets, and it's a great win when you can do it collaboratively. And I know Stephanie Hilferty was a big part of that at state legislator, and I'm incredibly proud of the great work that she did on that over many years with so many other people, Councilmember Van Franken and Joe Geruso and others. And so a great achievement.
As we were just up on the West End and thinking about the waterfront up there, let's pause for a minute and talk about hurricane risk. What feedback do you all hear from companies about the risks that tropical storms and sea level rise pose to Orleans and Jefferson parishes, and how do you address those concerns? I mean, they've been in the news a lot lately. What do we do about that?
We deal with it every day. When I started in 2020, one of the things that I picked up on pretty quickly was that our sales team was going out and meeting with corporations, with associations, with meeting planners, and trying to reason through why August and July were good months to do business in our city for meetings and conferences, which was a challenging task, to say the least. We really pivoted our strategy. We sat down and developed a little bit better, I think, approach. And the approach has been to demonstrate what's happened in the last 20 years, which is the hurricane risk reduction system that's been established, a $14 billion hurricane risk reduction system that is throughout the region and protects us against the risk. It doesn't alleviate the risk entirely, but it is certainly the leading mechanism anywhere on the Gulf Coast and probably in the country to protect communities from risk. In fact, just a couple of years ago when Hurricane Ida came through, we had a massive hurricane that hit our community. It caused substantial damage. It was certainly not without its disruptions, but we had a convention 8 days later at the convention center. The customer, I mean, I had to get on the phone with the customer. They actually didn't believe me that we could produce the event because what they were seeing on the news was different than what the reality was. So we're dealing with the risk every day. I think it's a challenge not just for these events that are billions of dollars to the economy, but also with business investment, with population increase. So, I mean, I think one, we have to talk about the facts. Is Tampa better prepared for a storm than New Orleans is? The answer is no. Is Houston better prepared than New Orleans for a storm? The answer is no. In fact, Houston is working with the Water Institute here in Louisiana to develop resiliency planning. Is Mobile? Is Miami? Are any of these communities, and we're certainly not out there like comparing, but I'll share with this room, the facts are we are prepared to deal with some of the risks that we face in a way that is superior to many of the other communities on the Gulf Coast. We have to say it, and we have to communicate about it, and we have to be real about it. It doesn't diminish the fact that the risk exists. There are plenty of other things that we should be doing to continue to build more resilient communities. I think these community lighthouses, these other projects that create some resiliency, being smarter about how we invest. I will add one more thing for all of us to take back and think through is we need to get back very focused on depoliticizing our flood protection authorities. You know, we did a lot of work for a long time to get to where we are. The focus on that needs to be on flood protection. If we're not safe from flood protection, then we're not safe. Nobody can invest, nobody can live, nobody can be secure. So politicizing that process, I mean, depoliticizing that process unlocked $14 billion in federal money from the taxpayers of this nation to support us in building the hurricane risk reduction system. We will need, again, to continue to address this through maintenance and other things. The politics of it and the appointment process, we've got to deal with it. I know there are legislators looking at it. This room and every place that you can talk about it, depoliticizing the flood protection authorities across our region, across our state is critical to our future success.
Such great points, Walt. I would just add, one of the ways that I've heard the last 20 or so years of the experience in Orleans Parish is a set of three reckonings. The first was Hurricane Katrina, and that was about our flood protection system from storm surge and hurricanes. The second was in 2017 and 2018 when the city had a series of failures at the Sewerage and Water Board with our internal drainage in the city. That is a work in progress, but we are clearly laser focused on. The mayor and the administration are laser focused on addressing that, and we saw action at the legislature even this past session. And then Ida, I'm so glad you brought up the lighthouses and Ida, because that was a reckoning, I think, around our grid. And I think in addition to, boil water advisories, I think one of the things that we hear from businesses and families the most is reliability around power. I think we've all experienced, whether it's childcare or, just being at work and our teams, not being able to plan around, rain events. We need to take what could be liabilities and think about how we talk about the region as a way that is not just battle tested and knows what to do with resilience and with disaster planning and emergency response, but also where we can actually talk about something like our grid as an asset. I know we are not here today and it might seem far-fetched at the moment, but what if we actually thought of our grid as being one of the most hardened grids in the entire country? What if you could actually talk about the grid in the New Orleans region in the same way that someone who is operating a server farm talks about uptime, right? 99 point, they think they call it 5 nines, 99.999% uptime for your website. And so if we could think about how we build in resilience, how we build in microgrids and islanding, how we think about employing batteries, as California has done extremely well to manage fluctuations in power supply on their grid and pricing. I think that this is one of those quintessential areas where New Orleans, because we are already leading and thinking about grid resilience, but I see so much opportunity for our business community, for our public sector to really lead and turn this, what could be a liability in terms of how we talk about this externally, how we talk about this with our business community, and really turn it into an asset.
I love that. And I just want to echo that and what you both are saying, because really, resilience is something that is built into our plan. And I love the thought of looking at threats instead of kind of shutting down or pretending it doesn't exist, you have to have a reckoning. You can't have your head in the sand. You look at a threat and think about ways to mitigate, but also turn it into an opportunity. I think that's something that the state has done really, really well with energy. Looking at, okay, we're seeing a changing tide, a shift in energy usage and what consumers want with energy and what we need to do with energy production and consumption, and using that as a ability to say, okay, we are an energy leader, let's attract all of the above. And we've seen such an incredible influx of renewable energy companies, energy overall. Again, taking what could have been a threat to our economy and to our livelihood and turning it into an opportunity. And I think looking at grid resilience, narrative too obviously factors into it, and looking at it as an opportunity. It's something that I'm charged with, or I'm charging myself with over the next year or two, is really looking at our built environment and how can we encourage more resilient design, whether it is in structures, but also like battery usage, renewable energy usage. It's something that I think, again, we need to really look at head on, and then make those changes, make those success stories, and tell that story so that it is really part of our reality.
Thank you all. Okay. Holding on to young talent is one of the clearest ways to reverse population decline, long-term strategy. How can we create more opportunities for young people to stay and build their careers in Greater New Orleans? And this is for all of you.
So one is brainwashing. I took my 8-year-old up to DC last week, and I worked with LED at the Freedom 250 Pavilion, and I brought her along because I wanted her to see DC, and we were walking around, and she said, "I love this town. It's beautiful. I could see myself living here." And I said, "Well, I love this town too. It's beautiful." And she said, "But don't worry, Dad. I'm going to stay in New Orleans. I don't want you and Mom to have to get on a plane when you're old to come visit me." And, so brainwashing is the first. That's key. I think, two, it goes back to what I was talking about before, which is entrepreneurial spirit, Idea Village, and so many of the great partners in our community who have done incredible work growing this entrepreneurial pipeline has succeeded and continues to need investment, support, and growth. But then we've also got to figure out how do we help them scale and grow so that young people feel that there is a way to advance. We at our company have the great benefit of having people who have been on the team for 6 months and for 45 years. And so I'm seeing this incredibly different spirit that influences how people make decisions and what they expect out of their careers and their unique approach to the world. Young people, though, want to advance quickly in their careers. We've got to figure out how to help that happen. But, and I don't want to just keep coming back to narrative, but narrative matters a lot. How we talk about ourselves matter. There are unique opportunities here in cultural innovation and so many different ways that are attractive. We have to compete for talent the way that we compete for everything else. We've got to highlight the great work that Shell does in helping to preserve and protect our culture with Jazz Fest every year. We've got to celebrate the fact that the Saints put us on an international stage every week of the football season in one of the most iconic stadiums in the world. I mean, not just in the nation, in the world. We've got to celebrate that we are the home of so much of American culture and the face of America in so many communities. We have to recognize that the Zurich Classic is here in Jefferson Parish because the leaders in Switzerland chose 25 years ago to invest here in our community because they believe so strongly that this was a special place. And we've got to make sure that they can continue to do that. Those are just a couple of little things that we need to celebrate more and beat up on ourselves less so that we can continue to be attractive. Communities that thrive are communities that are optimistic and that lean into that optimism. It doesn't have to be blind optimism, but there are plenty of things to rally around in our community, and we've got to find a way as a people to get a little bit more energized and positive about what our community can do. Doesn't mean we don't need to criticize it. It doesn't mean we don't need to push. And it doesn't mean that we don't need to call out the shortcomings. It just means that we've got to get to a place where we can really lean into the beauty and the remarkable nature of this place. It's why people love it, and it's why we continue to be able to compete on a level that we have no business competing on given our size and given our population size. So let's do that. Let's do that together. Let's do it as a region.
Yeah, on a personal note, I was one of those people. I'm not from New Orleans or Louisiana. I grew up actually outside the United States and moved here when I was, I think, 24, and just completely fell in love with it, and I never want to leave. I think, again, there's a lot of beating up. Sometimes it like hurts my feelings to hear people beat up on this town, this my adopted home, because I just love it so much. But I think really just, on a more macro level, looking at our undeniable assets, are the things that are God-given to us in a way, or if not God-given, are so baked into our DNA now that they are naturally part of us. One is obviously the river. We are here because of the river. There's so much industry and opportunity tied to that. That's not changing. The other is, again, looking at young people especially, our culture. We have one of the most unique regions in the entire world. There is no place like this city, and it's what attracted me here originally. It's what attracted so many people here. And I think a lot of the issues that we do beat ourselves up on are fixable. We think they're not, but a lot of the quality of life and crime, we're already seeing crime be addressed in tremendous ways, at least multi-year lows. It's really exciting. A lot of the things, the infrastructure, public safety, et cetera, those actually are fixable things, and we're seeing leaders devote that energy to fix them. And how exciting is it to think that maybe some of the things that are preventing people from wanting to stay or wanting to move here, we can fix and address. And then we have our wonderful assets that make this region so special and so unique. It just makes me really excited.
Just a couple of additional thoughts. One is an anecdote that I think illustrates so many of the issues that we've talked about today around narrative and the reality on the ground. And I find this both, it's funny, but it also, I think, is in some ways an indictment of where we've been. We actually had to have a ribbon cutting on the NASA display at the airport. Yeah, and it's like you go to any town in this country that has even a toehold in a relationship with NASA and aerospace, and they are trumpeting that to the stars when you get, right off the jet bridge coming into the airport. And in New Orleans, I'm sure you all know this, but it's one of my favorite talking points. Every rocket that has ever taken a human from U.S. soil into outer space in the human spaceflight program since Apollo, with the exception of a couple of SpaceX rockets, has been built in New Orleans at the NASA Michoud Assembly facility. We are the nation's rocket factory. There's over 3,000 people every day literally building Artemis and the Apollo capsule. So I hope you all had all of the moon joy over this spring, because it truly was a story about your neighbors and your coworkers who did that, built literally the most complicated machine that humanity has ever built. And we barely tell that story. We had to, the airport was amazing. Kevin and his team, worked it out with us, but we had to get that SLS display from NASA and actually park it next to Gate 9 so that we could tell that story to visitors and locals when they're here. And I think, to me, that is illustrative of everything Walt and Annalisa have shared, where, are we telling our story in the right way? Like, we have a commercial aerospace industry in this town. We have machines that aerospace companies come in from all over the country and are just flabbergasted that they haven't even heard that there's a 7-axis welding machine or friction stir welders that exist out at the Michoud Assembly Facility. They just didn't even know it was on the map. The site selectors didn't know about it, et cetera. And so I think it illustrates our lack of attention to detail when we're telling the story about ourselves and the jobs that are here. But then it's also very much about, I think, what Annalisa was saying, and Walt as well, about Vision 2035. We have so many industries here that we either already are or should be regionally and nationally competitive in. Aerospace, advanced manufacturing, maritime, defense, transportation and logistics, culture and hospitality. The list goes on. And we who live here know everything that is going on, or at least a glimpse of what's going on. If we are not telling that story and we are not being intentional about connecting those dots, getting back to your original prompt, Becky, around young people, how do we expect the folks graduating from our 13 higher ed institutions in this region, if we aren't telling that story? We have to have a ribbon cutting to tell the story about NASA. how do we expect a young engineer graduating from UNO or LSU or a young chemistry major from Xavier to know about the opportunities that exist here? So I think that the onus is on us, those of us in the room, those of us in leadership positions. The mayor every day brings that urgency to telling that story, and that's what Walt was referencing. We are putting a flag in the ground around the huge amount of economic development that's going to happen around LIT. And so that's a job and transportation corridor in New Orleans East, and then also around the Nash at Michoud Assembly Facility, which is a commercial aerospace and advanced manufacturing hub. So we couldn't be more excited about that, but we need everybody in this room and everybody in this town to be rowing in the same direction on that.
Terrific. This has been such a great discussion, but it is time to turn it over to the audience for questions. We've had lots of questions coming in online, and we welcome any of you in the audience to continue submitting questions in the 10 minutes that we have left. You can also write down your question and give it to one of the BGR researchers here in the room. Okay, I'm going to start with one of the ones that's already come in. So this one has to do with equitable development. What are Orleans and Jefferson parishes doing to expand job opportunities and population growth in chronically underinvested areas like New Orleans East and parts of the West Bank?
Sure, just because I was just talking about it. I mean, I think that there's been a longstanding recognition that the geography of a city's economy is uneven, right? Just like with affordability, with flood risk, with so many other things, investment more naturally is going to happen in certain communities rather than others. And I think for us to think about equitable growth, we need to be growing the pie, because as I mentioned earlier, we can't be just addressing wicked problems. We can't be just managing what we have. We need to be thinking about growth, but then we also need to be thinking about who benefits from that growth and what communities benefit from that growth. And I think that certainly is true within Orleans Parish, within New Orleans, but it's also true across the region. And so I think, the New Orleans East is a textbook example where, if it was its own municipality, it would be the 5th or 6th largest in the entire state of Louisiana. It has a very large middle and upper class tax base, but there has not been the level of leadership and accountability to connect the opportunities that exist in that community, both on the retail side and on the residential side, but also on the industrial side and the economic development at scale. And so we need to be very intentional about those strategies in order to be able to drive investment to those communities, because if we are not intentional, you better believe that Southern Mississippi would love to see the 15 million square feet of anticipated demand for new warehouse space and the new job growth that's going to come out of LIT. They would love to have it. If we aren't planning for it right now, those jobs are not going to stay in New Orleans East. They are going to leave potentially even the region. And so I think we need to, be very intentional. We need to be ready to grow, and then also think about where we want to intentionally see that growth happen.
Economic equity is one of the major tenets of our plan. It's all important. We cannot have an economy where we're seeing, you're seeing this on a national level, unfortunately, a widening gap between low income and high income, and an erosion of the middle class. That's not going to be good for any economy, and it's not going to be good for this region. And so we do have a number of focuses to try and build wealth, especially in lower income areas, but across Jefferson overall. We have in-house small business financing, and one of the major goals of that is to provide access to capital to businesses that may not be able to get it from traditional sources. And I'm proud to share that a couple of years ago, I think it was 78% of our loans were to women and minority-owned businesses. We also have a number of initiatives for at-risk industries. We actually created a revolving loan fund for commercial fishermen in the seafood industry, the Sea Fund, a couple of years ago, and we've had targeted efforts to reach Grand Isle, we have a Grand Isle Jewels off-bottom oyster initiative to look at economic and natural environmental resilience. And then we have a number of initiatives looking at housing. One of the major focuses in our Jefferson Edge 2030 plan is to ensure there is a diversity of housing, both in the actual types of housing and the structure of the built environment, but also affordability. And then public transit. It really is important. We have so many industries that have a wide range of jobs and salaries. And a lot of people are reliant on things like public transit and childcare. We have to ensure that those sorts of services exist, not just for the individuals that are impacted, that may not be able to get to work or may not be able to go to work because of childcare reasons, but also to ensure business continuity. Anyway, that's all to say that this is a major focus of ours. We want to ensure that there is equity in wealth and that we can grow all wealth for the region.
Terrific. We have several questions that have come in from the audience related to state and federal funding. I'm just going to roll these together and any of you can jump in. Given the most recent legislative session where the greater New Orleans region was targeted and attacked, how do we get more cooperation / collaboration from the state? And as state and federal funding becomes more scarce and politicized, how should we be thinking about funding for solutions to the problems we've discussed here today? So feel free to jump in on any of this.
Wow, that one that's feels like a stick of dynamite. Yeah, look, I think there has been an almost eternal struggle between our region and the rest of the state, and particularly the city and the rest of the state, that has been politically challenging for a very long time. So I want to say I don't feel like we should fall into the trap of thinking this is somehow a new phenomenon. It's just it gets exacerbated from time to time. So one, the first step is dial the temperature down a little bit. And let's get back to the concept that every citizen of New Orleans and of Jefferson Parish and of the region is also a citizen of Louisiana, regardless of where their political affiliation lies or even their political views. And so how do we move forward together to accomplish great things? The truth is, while the state and the city have been battling, there have also been some incredible investments that the state's made over the last couple of years that have been very helpful. Public safety is chief among those, and I think we're seeing the results of the collaboration between them. That's not always easy, but it's certainly been effective. I think we're seeing a similar strategy emerge with economic development, where the Louisiana Office of Economic Development has done a great job of outreach and engagement collaboratively. So those things don't always get the headlines because they don't get clicks on NOLA.com and on the other news services. But we certainly want to lean into the opportunity to work together, and there are numerous ways to do that. That being said, I'll grab one thing that you mentioned, early childhood education. So headlines yesterday that LEAP test scores were improving across the state of Louisiana. I wonder why. Maybe because we started investing in early and childhood education about 6 years ago, and that investment is now paying off. So what we need to do is avoid backing off of those investments and continue the trend forward. There are a lot of people who want to take credit for the things that have been done in the last year or two. Certainly, there is reason for optimism about literacy investment and other things, but I think the data is very, very clear on this. All the brain architecture gets developed. I'm looking at Melanie Bronfens, who's been in this battle forever, and so many others in this room. The brain architecture gets done between 0 and 3. The investment in that the state has made over the last several years has been record-breaking, and now the results are speaking for themselves. So let's not back off on that, because foundationally, that is how you build a stronger economy. It takes time, but now we're seeing that as time goes on, those investments are paying off. It also makes sense for the workforce of today. If you want 70% of people of families in Louisiana, of children in Louisiana, have both or their only parent full-time in the workforce. So what does that mean? A high reliance on high-quality early childhood education to be able to get to work, to be able to get a promotion, to be able to build a career, to be able to show up as their fullest and best self. And early childhood education is a key there. We should make sure that we prioritize as a region support for that state investment to continue, because it's foundationally important to the workforce. It's foundationally important for our children and for the economy of the future that we want to build. we should never back off on that investment. There are plenty of other things that we need to invest in as well, but that to me is core competency for a state that wants to grow.
And that's how you keep young people too, investing in early childhood education and just education in general. When you have young people come here and then, grow and have families, we want them to stay. And having quality schools and quality early childhood education is key to that too. Just to piggyback on that last point.
It's not rocket science.
To continue the theme, yeah. I didn't wear my NASA pin today. I obviously echo what both Walt and Annalisa shared. I would just say that I think the mayor, the city, the region, I think are just very pragmatic. I think that there's a lot of the conversations that happen, whether it's in media or, that grab headlines. And then I think there are some really, really tangible areas where the city and the state are collaborating. So whether it's public safety or homelessness, those areas the state has deeply engaged. I think on the economic development side, you can see really major investments in alignment. And I think LED, Secretary Bourgeois Bennett and Josh Flake, Rachel Shields, I mean, the team there is so New Orleans focused in a lot of ways, or rather, they probably wouldn't want me to frame it that way, but I think they have an affinity to New Orleans, a knowledge of New Orleans that I think is paying real dividends for the region. And it looks like things like the new lab investment that's happening at the former naval support activity, where the state through LSU is very successful in getting a very large National Science Foundation grant around the future of energy and how the state can continue to lead. And there's a nationally, internationally recognized hard tech incubator called New Lab building a $30 million facility there with a great deal of state support. And so there are so many stories about where there's real alignment in the vision of the state and the city. And I think we really try to be pragmatic and focus on those. I will say also, I forgot to mention earlier, we've kind of touched on it, but higher ed and what's going on at UNO right now and trying to get a university that when I was at Benjamin Franklin High School had 17 or 18,000 people is trying to get back up to 6,000 right now. To see the state recalibrating and focusing again on our institutions of higher ed. The state is making an investment with Tulane and the charity hospital development. I think the list goes on, and we just shouldn't let the politics, which should be dialed back, which are not productive both internally and regionally, but also not nationally. I think really focusing on the things that are happening is I think the very pragmatic approach we should take.
I am afraid that is all the time we have for questions. It kills me to shut this down because there's so much more to discuss. But I want to say thank you again to First Horizon Bank for its generous sponsorship. And thank you to our wonderful host, the New Orleans Saints. For all of you in the audience, please remember to complete your survey. It really helps us to make these events as interesting and relevant as possible. We want to hear from you. A recording of today's breakfast briefing will be available on our website very soon at bgr.org. It will also be rebroadcast on WWNO New Orleans Public Radio on Tuesday, July 14th at both 10 a.m. and again at 10 p.m. And before you leave, if you're not already, I encourage you to become a BGR member. A QR code is up on the screen. Your membership fuels our research and makes events like this possible. Thank you all for joining us. Have a great day and a great summer. Take care.